Welcome to today's presentation, which is going to be focused on one critical ceremonies of the Scrum methodology, the sprint review. First, it all starts with a product backlog. Then, during the sprint planning, the team align on what they are going to work on during the next iteration. They define a sprint goal and develop the sprint backlog. The iteration starts. The team meets daily during the stand-up. And, at the end of the sprint, the team has created product increments that can potentially be released to the customer. But as we all know, during the sprint, the team faces challenges, makes decisions and trade-offs. They also updates daily their tasks with hours they've worked on, which helps all product stakeholders understand the progress made through the sprint burndown chart. And all these outputs become inputs to the sprint review, which is typically follows by the sprint retrospective. But, let me stop here this contextual view, and let us focus on the sprint review. First, let's talk about the sprint review, and look at this data flow diagram that shows the expected inputs, the resources that can be leveraged during the meeting, the people attending the meeting, and the expected outputs of this ceremony. Obviously, the purpose of the sprint review is to inspect and adapt the created product increments and, to achieve this objective, the Scrum Master who facilitates the ceremony should do its best to enable a transparent and multi-directional communication between all the stakeholders and the Scrum team. As you can see on this diagram, the sprint review is for all product stakeholders. For everyone who has an interest or is affected by the product developed by the team. This could be managers, solution leads, project managers, or the customers. That said, if the team is developing a product that can affect an entire organization, you may not want to invite everyone within the organization, right? And so, without excluding any stakeholders, you'll still want to find the right balance between transparency and efficiency. You don't want to have hundreds of people participating and actively asking questions throughout the review, because at the end of the day, the sprint review is a time-boxed ceremony. And so, you might need to distinguish between participating stakeholders and informed stakeholders. Now, looking at the inputs of the meeting, we have all the outputs of the sprint goal, the sprint backlog, the created increments, a list of impediments, and so on. But there are also organizational assets and enterprise resources that provide valuable inputs to the meeting. For example, the product owner may leverage some market analysis that can explain to the attendees why the team focused on a specific user story. Another example will be the existing infrastructure and architecture of the product that could help the audience understand the how. And, then, of course, we have the team's definition of done that drive the decision to accept or reject an increment. So, at the end of the sprint review, the product owner should have approved or rejected the product increments. The team should also have added to the product backlog all the captured feedback. This could be updated requirements, enhancement requests, or acknowledged trade-offs that had to be made during the sprint and that may need be resolved at a later time, and, yes, I'm referring here to technical debt. Last but not least, as the team inspects and adapts the product increments, the team will make decisions, identify risks and escalate impediments. So, as the Scrum Master, you must document those as well. All is great, but that's just the basics, right? So, now, let's talk about how to prepare and facilitate a sprint review, starting with the do's and don'ts, the do's and the don'ts. First, as any other meetings you facilitate, you should always have a clear agenda so that the attendees know what to expect. They should understand the purpose of the meeting and the flow of what's going to happen. You must be prepared to tell the story of the sprint. Each and every sprint is different. What was the goal of the sprint? Have we met the goal? What happens during the sprint? And I'll talk about how you can leverage the sprint burndown chart to answer these questions. Second, you need to organize the demos based on the initial sprint goal so that the demo makes logical sense and can be easily followed by the attendees. And as you demo each done product increments, and only the done ones, you want to encourage the stakeholders to provide feedback, and organizing the demos logically will help toward this objective. At the same time, you must timebox each demo/discussion so that the meeting doesn't drag for hours. You have a limited time, right? And as you go through the demos, be transparent on the challenges the team had to overcome, and celebrate the successes, acknowledging all the work the team has done. And last, you want to record the sprint review because it is a critical point in the delivery process. It marks the end of a 2-week journey. Plus, if you record the sprint review, the stakeholders that cannot attend can still be informed, and it'll also help you document any decisions made during the meeting. So that's all the do's. Now, let's go over the don'ts. Show up unprepared or with no agenda. A sprint review happens every 2 weeks. It can easily become a routine. Sure, the purpose of the meeting remains the same as the last sprint review. But it's not same the sprint. Again, every sprint is unique, with a peculiar goal, and a different burndown chat. So the story to tell is always different. Each and every time. And it's exciting. Second, you can't ignore the sprint goal. There was a clear goal to attain. If you ignore the agreed goal, it'll lead the team to lose focus and miss important objectives. And so, organizing the demos in a way that align with the goal is critical. And talking about demo, another important don't is to not perform a dry run of your demos. Granted, the user story to demo should be done, but if you cannot successfully demo a done story, this could result in a lack of trust from your stakeholders, and they will start questioning if the team has indeed delivered what was expected and met its commitments. So, spend the time to dry run your demos with the team before the sprint review. This will avoid unnecessary churns. And obviously, don't be tempted to demo incomplete work. Even if an increment is 90% done, it's not done. You cannot ship it. So, don't spend time demoing something that cannot be shipped. First, because the sprint review is time-boxed, and second, because you will have time to demo it during the next sprint review, when it's actually done. Okay. Next point is to exclude stakeholders. While you do not want to invite the entire organization to your sprint review, you must not exclude any stakeholders. As I said, it's an interesting stakeholder management dilemma. But, at the end of the day, keep in mind that the sprint review is the forum where you give all stakeholders the opportunity to provide feedback. Excluding stakeholders could lead to missed opportunities. Another don't is to fail following up on feedback. If stakeholders provide feedback, make sure it's documented and followed up on. Failing to do so will undermine the value of the sprint review. And the best way to capture the received feedback is to capture it in the product backlog. Simple as that. And finally, the sprint review is not intended to be a status update to the leadership team. The review focuses on the work completed during the sprint and encourage honest feedback. That's all. So, during the sprint review, you want to tell the story of the completed sprint and receive feedback on the increments. And to best tell a story, you need to consider the 4 parts of a good storytelling. First, we have the setup. This is the opening of the story where you introduce the characters, the situation with the necessary background information for the story to make sense. Then, we have the rising action. This is the part of the story where the tension increases, and the stakes are raised. The main character faces obstacles and challenges, and the story builds towards the climax, a crisis of some sort. The rising action is also where you do your best to engage the audience so that they are fully invested in the story. Then, we have the crisis, the turning point in the story where the challenges reach their highest points, and the main character must make a crucial decision. In our case, we don't want a crisis, right? Instead, we want the story to have very little drama but still be interesting for the audience. So, this is where we'll do the demos. And finally, we have the resolution. This is the conclusion of the story where the demo comes to an end. This is also where you tie up any loose ends and provides closure for the audience, while still opening a door for a sequel. Because in our business, we often need a few sequels to get to the ending, the final product release. Anyway, this is what you want to do during a sprint review. It's not about showing things. You want to tell the story of the last 2 weeks in an engaging and structured way. And, obviously, you want to receive feedback from the audience. Right? Inspect and adapt. The 2 key objectives of a sprint review. So what does this storytelling thing mean exactly? Well, let's dive into each part. First, the setup. In our case, you want to welcome the attendees and inform them that the meeting is going to be recorded. Why? Because, as mentioned earlier, the sprint review is a key deliverable for the team, and a fantastic communication tool to inform all product stakeholders of the progress made toward the final product release. And then you go over the agenda that covers the next couple of hours, since we typically run the sprint review, sprint retrospective and the next sprint planning back-to-back, right? So, as you go through the menu of the day, you want to communicate that feedback throughout the review is more than welcomed, but, to keep things moving, as the facilitator, you will do your best time boxing each conversation and ensure topics that require further discussions are captured for follow-up meetings. Alright, let's now move on to the next part, the rising action. Remember, this is the part of the story where the tension increases, and the stakes are raised. So, here, we want to remind the attendees about why they are present, and tell them what happened the last couple of weeks to build towards the climax of the sprint review, which are the demos. And so, here, the first thing is to remind the audience about the sprint goal, and use clear KPIs to inform them if the goal has been met or not. Those KPIs can include the number of backlog items, story points or hours the team initially committed to get done. And then, tell them how many have actually been attained. But, on top of that, you need to explain how the team manages to get to the finish line, if you manage to cross it. Were the last 2 weeks as easy as surfing on a lake? Have there been any challenges? Did the team make significant breakthroughs? Anyway, all of these questions can be explained looking at the sprint burndown chart. Indeed, the sprint burndown chart provides meaningful insights into how the team manages to attain the sprint goal. And, this means that as the Scrum Master, you must know how to read this chart, and do so quickly, because you don't want to spend 10 minutes going over the chart, right? Let me say that again, so it sinks in. The purpose of reading the sprint burndown chart is only to help you set the action into context. Or I should say, to frame all the work that the team did to produce the product increments that are going to be demoed next. Okay. For fun, why don't we look at a few burndown charts and figure out the story behind each chart? Let us look at this first burndown chart. As you can see, the development team executed perfectly the sprint and achieved the sprint goal to the teeth. But, let's be honest. If your team manages to get this type of burndown chart, they very likely fake it. It's just too perfect to be true. And so, you should definitively bring it up to the sprint retrospective as a discussion point. Now, in this second scenario, after a slow start, which is typical, the development team managed to get back on track and achieve the sprint goal. It's a well-executed sprint, and there's nothing else to say here. Now, on this one, we can see that the development team resolves faster than expected the committed scope. And it also seems that the team decides to a break for the remainder of the sprint. Why? I don't know. In the end, while the team did meet the sprint goal, the team could possibly have brought in new user stories into the sprint backlog. Again, bring it up during the sprint retrospective to figure the why. Now, in this fourth example, it's the same scenario, but this time, the team does bring in new work into the sprint. And, obviously, when the team does that, the team exceeds the sprint goal, while still maintaining a sustainable pace. It's definitively a better than expected sprint, and, as the Scrum Master, you definitively be happy to work with such a great team. Now, let's look at a sprint where things didn't go as planned. You can see here, that the team did not achieve the sprint goal because not all committed backlog items made it to the done state. Why? There could be many reasons. Maybe a user story was not sufficiently defined and should not have been brought into the sprint backlog. Maybe there was a technical issue that surfaced and couldn't been resolved on time for completing the underlying backlog item. Or maybe, a team member felt sick and had to sit on the sideline for a few days. Things happen. But you need to explain these things during the sprint review so that the product stakeholders understand the situation and, more importantly, feel that you have a good handle on the problem, even if it's resolved. Right? In fact, ideally during the sprint, you want to work with your product owner to mitigate these impediments. So here, this is exactly what happened. The development team experienced some challenges. But the team works with the product owner to remove the user story that cannot be done and adjust the sprint goal. And so, the team ends up meeting the revised sprint goal. It's not perfect. But it's done right. It's done keeping in mind the principle of agility. Now, let's look at two scenarios that can happen but should hopefully be exceptions. The first one is the worst case scenario. The internal or external situation for the current sprint has drastically changed. Something unplanned has happened. Maybe it's because the market the product is directed to has shifted. The initial need is no longer valid, and there's no point to spend more time on developing a feature that is now irrelevant. Maybe it's because the development team realized that to complete the sprint goal, an external team must have completed a particular deliverable, and sadly, it's not the case. Anyway, at the end of the day, in collaboration with the Scrum Master and the development team, the product owner decides to terminate the sprint. It's sad. It's unfortunate, but it's better than wasting everybody's time, right? Plus, if your product backlog is periodically refined, there's always an added value the team can work on while waiting for an external team to complete its work, or for the product owner to clarify the new requirements the market is asking for. So, while the situation isn't great, by canceling the sprint, the product owner allows the team to pivot quickly and focus its energy on another and more relevant goal. And, the last example I want us to talk is an example where the Scrum Master can greatly help resolve. Here, you can see that the development team did seem to achieve the sprint goal, but the team didn't update its backlog items every day. And so, no one can truly understand what happened during the sprint. And so here, since you're the Scrum Master, I won't be nice to you, but you're failing your duties. Why? Because you haven't coached the team to update the backlog items they're working on every day. So, you need to proactively tell the team during the daily stand-up the importance of updating their backlog items. It's part of the Agile values. being transparent about the progress made or the challenges we face. It's not about monitoring and controlling the team's every single move. It's about communicating transparently to all parties engaged in the development of the product where the team is. Anyway, you get my point. So, at the end of this second part of the storytelling, the rising action, you want the attendees to understand why they are here, explaining them what the sprint goal was. And you want to tell them briefly how the team managed to attain this goal, navigating them through the burn-down chart. Alright, let's now move on to the next part of the storytelling, the demos. So far, we set the context, we rise the action, and now, it's time for the demos. And while you can organize your demo simply going one story at a time, you may not get the best feedback from the attendees. Remember that the goal for the demo is to inspect the potentially shippable increments and encourage feedback from your stakeholders to ensure the delivered product meets their requirements. And to do that, you must keep them engaged. The best way to do that is to organize your demos logically. For example, if your team has worked on building a new UI-centric feature, you can start from the UI, and guide the stakeholders to all the back-end changes that realize this UI, so they best understand the end-to-end flow and potential limitations or risks of developed features. Or, if you're working on an API, you might want to show how the API can be called using Postman, and then explaining the data elements that are being surfaced by the API, and talking about potential challenges identified with your downstream or upstream dependencies. And obviously, as you team demo each done user story, you want to have a consistent structure for each demoed items, clearly stating why this story was important, linking back to the sprint goal, and what need to be considered next, again, encouraging the attendees to provide feedback. Anyhow, if there's no question, let me move on because all stories must have an end, and here we are. The end, the resolution. First thing first, as the team went through the demos, you should have captured the feedback from all the invited stakeholders. Since the meeting is recorded, it should be easy for you to follow up on what the next steps are, on what was discussed. And then, before effectively closely the sprint, you want to obtain the green light from the product owner to close it so that there's some type of formal approval. So, you close the sprint, and then you provide the final status of sprint, going over the usual KPIs, and highlighting the stories that were removed, not completed or added. Don't forget to thanks again the team for their work. And finally, stop the recording. Okay. Before wrapping up this short presentation, in a world where 49% of Agile projects fail, it's clear that people are struggling to understand its principles. Allow me to tell you about the Agile Practitioner's Survival Guide. This guide leaves out the fluff and presents a practical path to adopting and integrating Agile in your company, highlighting different methodologies and diving into the Scrum methodology. Plus, earlier this year, I re-edited it to integrate everything I've learned in the past 6 years applying Scrum in various clients and industries. Above all else, I hope that this re-edition will prove to be even more useful and practical for those who utilize it. Alright, this is it for today. Thank you for watching, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Happy Sprint!